Welcome everyone to the Conversation Cafe for MUSC Sustainability Department. This month we will be hearing about the Charleston County Greenhouse Gas Inventory. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about MUSC. Our mission is to, at MUSC Sustainability, our mission is to build healthy communities by inspiring and implementing solutions to environmental, social, and economic challenges. And some of our initiatives include the bike share, healthy food, and transportation issues like CARTA. We work with them to get our employees on the all the buses really, but the park and ride especially. And we are building green buildings. Our Sean Jenkins Hospital won a national or a regional green building award for being LEED Silver. So if you want to find out more about what we're doing, we have a newsletter. It comes out once a month. You can go to musc.edu/go-green and sign up there. We're also on all the social media, including Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and there's an MUSC Yammer, and you can find us there at Broadcast Sustainability. All right, so today we're pleased to have Arielle Gerstein. She is the Sustainability Coordinator for Charleston County, and she will be talking to us today about the Charleston County Greenhouse Gas audit or inventory, and she did this inventory, so she really knows it backwards and forwards, and we're lucky to have her at the county and looking out for sustainability. She's the first county sustainability coordinator. She comes to us from Washington, D.C., where she worked at the EPA's Office of Water. And she likes being outside, like all of us. So we want to keep our environment healthy. And we're so excited about this. So Arielle, welcome. And we appreciate you being here. I am going to stop sharing. While I do that, I want to let everyone know to, if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat function and we will get to your questions at the end. And please keep your cameras off because it saves energy.
Thanks so much, Christine. So first of all, welcome to a discussion on Charleston County's greenhouse gas inventory, hosted by MUSC's Conversation Cafe. As Christine said, I'm Arielle Gerstein. I'm Charleston County's Sustainability Coordinator. And today I'm going to be discussing what a greenhouse gas inventory is, why it's important, and the county's next steps in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, a greenhouse gas inventory measures the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in a specific geographic area over a given time frame using carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. This inventory includes many different geographic areas, which I will discuss in more detail in a few slides. Okay, so what are carbon dioxide equivalent emissions? It's a little bit kind of confusing term, but essentially they're just used as a way to compare the global warming potential of different greenhouse gases to carbon dioxide. Other gases are converted to the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide with the same global warming potential. So the global warming potential is a measure of how much energy the emissions of 1 ton of gas will absorb over a given period of time, usually 100 years, relative to the emissions of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. The inventory measures carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide as shown on the screen. As you can see, methane and nitrous oxide have a much higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. The inventory does not include fluorinated gases at this time, but these gases can be in the thousands or tens of thousands in terms of global warming potential. So I just wanted to mention them, even though they are not measured in this inventory. Okay, so as discussed on the last slide, the county's greenhouse gas inventory focused on carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Carbon dioxide makes up a majority of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at 79%, followed by methane at 11%, nitrous oxide at 7%, and fluorinated gases at 3%. We continue to see fluoride gases increase over time, even though they're still like a very small percentage. These gases stay in the atmosphere for varying amounts of time, which contributes to their global warming potential, with carbon remaining in the atmosphere for thousands of years. This is generally why carbon dioxide is focused on in emissions reductions work, because although it has the lowest global warming potential, it is the most prevalent and stays in the atmosphere the longest. Carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere mainly through burning fossil fuels, burning solid waste, trees, and other biological materials. Methane primarily comes from agriculture, waste, landfills, things like that. And nitrous oxide mostly comes from industry and agriculture. Unlike many other greenhouse gases, fluorinated gases have no significant natural sources and come almost entirely from human-related activities. They're emitted through their use as substitutes for ozone-depleting substances like refrigerants and through a variety of industrial processes, such as aluminum and semiconductor manufacturing. So, how do greenhouse gases affect the climate? So, essentially, the Earth's climate is determined by the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is when naturally occurring gases are dispersed in the atmosphere and trap solar radiation. So overwhelming evidence shows that human activities are increasing the concentration of greenhouse gases and changing the global climate. So essentially, these gases intensify the natural greenhouse effect because they are being increased by our activities. And the increase in these gases cause global average surface temperature and atmospheric temperatures to rise. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what is included in the inventory. So the inventory covers the years 2018 and 2020. Usually inventories for municipalities are conducted every few years. And since I started gathering data in 2021, 2020 was the first year I could include in the inventory. So I thought it would be interesting to compare 2018, which is more of a business as usual year, to 2020 being almost a full year affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see if the trends witnessed in 2020 continue in future inventories. The inventories cover 3 geographic areas: Charleston County government operations, and all the municipalities within the county. The 3 main sectors, which we'll go into a lot more detail later, are covered in all the inventories are buildings, transportation, and waste. Carbon sequestration is included only in the Charleston County inventory, and the fleet and employee commute categories are only in the Charleston County government operations inventory. So I'm going to spend most of the rest of the presentation talking about these different inventories. I just wanted to include a little bit about why I included cities and towns within the county. So as some of you might or might not know, Charleston County government only has jurisdiction over unincorporated areas in the county. However, greenhouse gas emissions are not contained by geographic boundaries, so it's important that we all collaborate on climate action. So therefore, essentially, this inventory provides municipality baseline emissions data if they're interested in future reductions planning on their own or collaboratively. They can use the information however they would like, but the information is there for future use. Okay, so key findings. So between 2018 and 2020, we saw a decrease of 18% in countywide emissions, a 3% increase in government emissions, and between 16 and 35% decrease for all municipalities. The county also has a lower greenhouse gas emissions per capita at 10.6 than the US average of 12.98 in 2020. So I'm going to talk about in more detail later about some of the reasons for this decrease. because I think they're really interesting to discuss. Okay, so now I'm going to go over in detail the county-wide inventory. So as I mentioned previously, we included 4 sectors in the county-wide inventory. The first is buildings, and we use residential, commercial, and industrial electricity and natural gas data from Berkeley, Electric Cooperative, Dominion, and Santee Cooper. For the transportation sector, we use Google Environmental Insights Explorer for vehicle transportation. And for buses, we use CARTA data from the BCD COG. The data points were vehicle miles traveled and fuel type for vehicles, and for buses, we use the gallons of fuel used. For waste, we were provided the tons of waste landfill and the tons of waste composted from the Department of Environmental Management at the county. And for carbon sequestration, which is the only category, as you'll see, that is negative on the graph because it's actually absorbing carbon and not emitting carbon, we used a tool called the Land Emissions and Removal Navigator tool, which basically measured the amount of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions that are sequestered in greenbelt properties. Okay, moving on to this, basically this graph just kind of shows the information in a different way, just a different depiction of this is emissions by source. As you can see, electricity and gas and diesel make up the largest part of the emissions, which we'll discuss further in the upcoming slides. Okay, so about 60% of countywide emissions are from buildings. This is the highest percentage. Total building emissions between 2018 and 2020 decreased by 12%. So just wanted to point out something interesting, that according to Dominion's data, industrial electricity use decreased by about 50% between 2018 and 2020. The decrease is not due to COVID, because a large decrease was also seen in 2019. So I tried to investigate this decrease further, and I can't attribute it to something specifically. It could be due to a shift in business practices. Businesses are being more energy efficient, or it could be some businesses left the county, but there was a large decrease, which is what's making up a significant decrease, overall decrease in this sector. Okay, moving on to transportation. The transportation category accounts for the second largest emissions, between 34 to 38% of countywide emissions. Transportation activities release between 1.4 and 1.9 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. The decrease in transportation could be a result of more efficient vehicles on the road and people staying home during COVID-19. Moving on to waste. So waste is a very small part of the county's overall emissions, 2 to 3%. But it's important because landfills emit methane, which, if you remember from previous slide, has a much higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. Compost, I did measure, but it's not included in this graph because the emissions are so low, they would not be visible on the graph compared to the other bars. So compost can emit greenhouse gases, but it's very low compared to landfill waste. Okay, so carbon sequestration. So Charleston County has 160,000 acres of protected land thanks to our Greenbelt program. Some of this land is forested, which captures carbon. So the modeling that we did focused primarily on our forested land. Modeling does not allow for a difference in estimation between 2018 and 2020, so we use the same number for both inventory years. An estimated 59,034 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions have been sequestered through this program. This is not an annual measurement. The tool goes over about 5-year time periods. But in general, carbon sinks are vital to lowering greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon sinks are areas that absorb more carbon than they release. Forests are great carbon sinks, but they can also become carbon emitters. So wildfires and logging turn forests into emitters. And just kind of an interesting but sad fact is a portion of the Amazon rainforest, one of the world's largest carbon sinks, is now turning into a source of carbon emissions due to significant deforestation. So we wanted to measure this because we do have a lot of forested land, and it's important to keep protecting that. Okay, I wanted to touch on the energy supply mix for the county. So I discussed in the transportation slide how less driving during the COVID-19 pandemic could have contributed to a decrease in emissions from 2018 to 2020. So the second big reason for this decrease is likely the change in the county's energy supply mix. So we did not measure it from 2018 to 2020, but over a 7-year time period, because we already had data from our comprehensive plan for 2013, and I compiled the information for 2020. So it's important to look how the energy supply mix changed over the past decade in thinking about emissions. Between 2013 and 2020, the energy mix decreased in coal supply by 39%. It increased in natural gas or oil and nuclear by 23% for natural gas and oil and 7% for nuclear. The transfer from coal to natural gas could account for some of the decrease between 2018 and 2020. In addition, natural gas emits 50 to 60% less carbon dioxide when combusted in a natural gas power plant than emissions from a typical coal plant. However, it's important to note that unless the supply shifts increasingly toward renewables, then the decreases in emissions will not continue. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the municipalities inventory. I'm going to spend the next few slides on the individual municipalities inventory. So we conducted 16 individual inventories for the cities and towns located in Charleston County. The city of Charleston was not included because they have previously conducted their own inventories. And the map shows all the municipalities included, with the white areas of the map representing unincorporated areas of the county. In terms of sectors, we looked at buildings, transportation, and waste for this inventory. Buildings data is the same as the county inventory: residential, commercial, industrial, electricity, and natural gas, and use the same utilities. So nothing much to say there. We did collect energy use data for every municipality from Dominion mainly, and also from Berkeley. For transportation, we used the Google Environmental Insights Explorer once again for Mount Pleasant and North Charleston. Unfortunately, the Google data only provides data for municipalities over 25,000 people. So for the other areas, we had to weight the county data by population since the data wasn't available in any other form. For waste, it's the same thing. We don't have data for each municipality. So the county was again weighted by population. Okay, so this slide and the next slide show the per capita greenhouse gas emissions for each municipality. As I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, all municipalities showed a decrease between 2018 and 2020. So I think a good way to think about this is thinking about Charleston County's per capita emission, which if you remember from earlier, it was 10.6 in 2020. So almost all of the municipalities on this slide are higher than the county's per capita emission. And on this slide, the next one, all of the municipalities on this slide are lower than the counties. So just going to quickly wave that again. So you can just kind of see, even though there was a reduction, some of them are still a bit high compared to the county per capita. Okay. So moving on to this pie chart, which highlights the cities and towns within Charleston County that have the largest emissions. This is kind of a little bit of an easier way to think about the data. The 5 largest individual emitters also have the largest populations, with the city of Charleston, the city of North Charleston, and the town of Mount Pleasant all having industrial energy usage. So I don't think this pie chart is not really a surprise probably to anyone, seeing that the largest municipalities are the highest emitters. All of the municipalities represented in the category all other cities, towns, all individually account for less than 2% emissions for the city or town. Okay, now I'm going to move to the government-wide inventory. So it's important for Charleston County to evaluate our own emissions because we can more easily make strides in decreasing emissions from our own buildings and fleet. So we have easier control over those things than the county as a whole, and especially any of the municipalities. As you can see, solid waste makes up a significant amount of the county's emissions. This is because the county landfill is included in the inventory, although of course, government staff does not contribute fully to all of the emissions in the landfill. According to standard report protocol, if the landfill is owned and is in the jurisdiction of the county, we have to count it towards our emissions. For fleet, we use vehicle miles traveled, fuel type, and annual fuel use data from the county fleet operations. For employee commute, we conducted a survey for employees' commute to work, and we use employee air travel data from all county departments for the years covered. Okay, so I'm going to go over the sectors again, just like I did for the county. This is the government one. So buildings accounted for 7 to 8% of total emissions with the focus on electricity use. The county does have some natural gas meters, but the majority is definitely electricity. Okay, so fleet, really the same as the buildings, accounted for 7 to 8% of total emissions, with the largest emissions from the county's diesel vehicles. I did include jet fuel there, although it's a very small category. It represents the helicopters that we use to spray for mosquitoes, so that's why it was included. But really, the emissions rely heavily on our diesel vehicles. Okay, so as I mentioned in the previous slide, we conducted an employee commute survey, and not surprisingly, almost every employee drives to work every day. So given the locations of the county buildings, we're spread out all over the place, primarily our headquarters concentrated in North Charleston. Currently it would be very logistically difficult to use other modes of transportation. With the exception, we do have some downtown workers, so depending on where they live, they could possibly use alternative forms, but right now it's basically single passenger driving for the most part. Employee commute is the smallest driver of emissions. It only makes up 2 to 3% of emissions in the government inventory. Commuting emissions decreased by 45%, and we can attribute this to increased remote work during the COVID-19 pandemic and all air travel being canceled after March 2020. So for the 2020 year, we basically had no air travel. We do have it again now, so that would be something that would be counted more accurately. I shouldn't say accurately, but for future years, that would be full years of that travel. Okay, so solid waste, I already mentioned that it's a sector of emissions 82 to 83% because the Beast Ferry landfill is owned by the county. We are counting it toward our emissions despite many municipalities sending waste to this facility. Emissions increased by 4% between 2018 and 2020. This is likely due just to the growing population of the county. Okay, so that is an overview of the inventories, and I will just say if you're interested in reading more about the inventory, it is on our website, and after I'm through the presentation, I can put a link to the inventory in the chat. But essentially, we're now finished discussing the inventories, and I'm going to talk about how we're planning to use this data and what comes next now that we have baseline greenhouse gas emissions. So this slide goes through the current process we're taking for climate action planning. Essentially, as part of the climate action plan, we plan to create emissions reductions goals, short-term and long-term, and the plan will include emission strategies with the aim of achieving the goals. Please keep in mind that the final plan will need to be approved by our county council. So although we're going through the steps, the final plan, is at the discretion of council. So kind of our status, we're currently seeking approval from County Council to create a Climate Resilience and Sustainability Advisory Committee. If you're familiar at all with the city's City of Charleston's committee, the composition is very close to this committee. And the reason that we're looking to structure it close is because they successfully passed the climate action plan last year through the city council. We're going to our third reading next Tuesday to pass this committee. We'll also be forming 4 sector-specific volunteer work groups, which I'll discuss more on the next slide. And we're in the process of hiring a consultant, and we have an internal evaluation team at the county that will choose this consultant to assist with some of the modeling and quantifying emissions reductions strategies. So we're going to be forming 4 sector-specific volunteer work groups: buildings, transportation, waste, and carbon sinks. So you might notice these match closely to the inventory I just went over. So those are essentially the work groups we're going to be forming for. And if you're interested in participating in one or more of these work groups, I'm going to post a Google form in the chat. And you can sign up to participate. And that is all I have. Thank you so much to Christine for hosting this talk. And now I will answer any questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the chat.
Hello. Good job. That's great. So there are a couple of questions in the chat, and I did put the Resilience and Sustainability website and the inventory
thank you.
website. So yeah, I didn't have the link to the sign up.
I'll post it.
Okay, great. So one of the questions is, are there any emissions associated with the mosquito chemicals?
That's a good question, and one I did not look into. The only thing that I looked at was the fuel used for the helicopter that gets rid of the mosquitoes. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that would be, it probably wouldn't go in the inventory. It would probably we would just want to make sure we're using, chemicals that are safe, which I believe that we are. I've spoken to Public Works about it, and they do use chemicals that are safe for humans. But in terms of emissions, I'm not familiar, and I haven't heard of anyone like incorporating chemicals in that way into emissions.
So the person who asked the question is Rachel, and she used to work for MUSC, so she knows that we do take some chemicals into consideration. So the chemicals that are used for refrigeration, for example, and chemicals that are used in anesthesia. So those can be pretty potent greenhouse gas chemicals. So we're working on reducing our usage of all that.
Okay, yeah. No, thanks for the question. It's definitely something that I'll make a note of and look into next time.
And then another question is, are there any normalized statistics to account for population growth?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I mean, we just use census numbers. So fortunately, because the 2020 decennial census information was released while I was doing this, I was able to use those numbers, not the AC. I really didn't want to use the ACS stuff. So I was able to get updated numbers is what I'm trying to say, but normalized, sorry, I saw it pop up and then it went away, but.
Oh, that's great. It says normalized like emissions per person rather than total.
Oh, from what I've seen, I mean, and maybe Christine, you guys know, but from what I was seeing was that people were just basically taking the emissions and dividing them by the population. I mean, I haven't seen any other way to do it in terms of per capita.
Yeah, I think our software does all that for us. Um, but we do within the county, did you do that? Did you take the number of employees and do the per capita within the county's emissions?
Oh, no, we did not.
Okay, all right. So we do that for MUSC. So that might be where this question's going, and that might be an interesting number as well. So one person, can you just go over again the professional travel? One person was still curious about that. I think you did mention that it included plane trips and things.
Yeah, so the travel was only planes. So basically, I asked the departments, send me all of your travel for, 2018 and sorry, I just posted the survey if you want to sign up to be a volunteer. For 2018 and 2020, so they would send me like, okay, we had these employees go to Cleveland or wherever, and there's programs you can use that just, based on the mileage, tells you what the emissions would be. The plane stuff gets like a little tricky. So we didn't want to do any plane travel at the county level because I see people writing about scope here. It gets like a little tricky with that. It's like, do you include planes that are only going within Charleston County, which is almost no planes, or ones that leave the county and go to California? Like, whose emissions are those? And that gets to be kind of a mess. So the protocol that we used and that was like standard is that you just don't include it. But I thought for county employees, it seemed like they should be included because we are sending our employees on these trips.
Right. And you said for the trips, you only included planes. You didn't include like someone driving to Columbia for a work trip.
We didn't. And it was just because we didn't have that information. I mean, it was actually quite challenging to get the air travel information because it's not centralized. Every department keeps track of their own. So we didn't do, I mean, I guess like technically that should be included if you use a county vehicle, that would be included in the fleet numbers. So unless you use your own car and got reimbursed for a trip, which of course I'm sure there's some of that, but employees do use the county vehicles quite a bit. So that would have been included in the fleet as long as they use the county vehicle.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Let's see. What will the work groups do and what is expected of them? How will they work?
Yeah, so basically the work groups are there for brainstorming. So if we say, like, for example, okay, by 2035, we want to reduce county emissions by whatever percent, then we need to come up with sector-specific activities. And if you're familiar at all with the city's climate action plan, it's going to be very similar to that because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel on things, and we're working very closely with the city since we're all together on this. But essentially, so like if you're in the buildings group, you would be brainstorming activities that would reduce building emissions. So that could be energy efficiency projects, or that could be potential ordinances that we could pass that would be easier for renewable, or like I'm just making stuff up currently, but that's kind of what it would be. We'd be brainstorming activities that would show us reductions. So that's the idea, is if you're interested in those sectors and know anything about them and have ideas to contribute. So I think that I'm not sure how long we'll meet. I'm thinking probably like between a 4 to 8 month time period. It's probably going to be like we're going to meet once a month and it'll be remotely. I'm still figuring out when the meetings are going to be. On the form, if you fill it out, it asks your availability, like which groups you want to be in, and then if you want to meet like during the day, after work, that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't think it'll be a huge commitment, like probably 1 to 2 hours a month, probably one. And it's a volunteer thing, so if you miss a meeting, it's not the end of the world, but would love any help if you're knowledgeable and or passionate about these subjects. So
Yeah, after being involved with the city's climate action plan, it does help to have a lot of different resources and have a diversity of thought. So that's we encourage everyone to be involved with that. So a different question was, do you calculate scope 3 emissions? And for example, one of those could be leased assets that the county doesn't own.
Yeah, I mean, no, we did not do that. We could in future. I'm trying to think of what like a leased asset would be. So I mean, for buildings, we counted anything where we're paying the energy bill. And so for some of the properties, it's actually, we have a couple properties where the county doesn't even, like other people are using them, but the county owns them and they pay us. So it's like they're leasing from us, but they're still included in our inventory because we pay the bill. So anything where we're paying the bill, I think on the building side, on the fleet side, I'm not sure if there would be an example of that that I can think of. I mean, we have our cars and we have our, we have our construction vehicles and our lawn equipment and things like that. So
you must not be leasing things.
We could be, but I would have to look more into it to give you a better answer. So
Right. Well, I mean, from MUSC's perspective, we do lease a lot of property and we do lease vehicles and things like that. And if we're purchasing the fuel, we definitely counted that. And if we're paying the energy bill for the leased property, then we count it. But anything that we're not, like you said, getting the data for, it's just time consuming to get all that data and difficult to pry it out of the hands of wherever it is. So
yeah.
You can only do so much. I understand that. So another question was, what was the benefit of the change in energy mix over 3 years?
Yeah, so I mean, the benefit is that, I mean, for the most part, was just the drastic change from coal to natural gas. It wasn't over 3 years. It was, well, I'm not sure. We looked at it from 2013 and then in 2020. I can't say exactly like when the majority of the shift happened. But the benefit is like that coal is much higher emissions, produces much higher emissions than natural gas. But what I was trying to kind of get across was that although that could be like giving us a decrease because we see the change right now, it will flatline at some point because if we don't continue to lower emissions with our energy supply mix. So that's why we need to be seeing more of a change or increased changes to renewables and not just a change from coal to natural gas and then we're done. So that's kind of the major point that I was trying to make with that.
Yeah, it's very helpful that our energy companies are changing their fuel mix. It's a big deal and it definitely reduces our greenhouse gases. So so I think it's really important for people to remember that they're reducing their fuel usage, but they're still using fossil fuels. So we really need to encourage them to use more renewables and get those on the grid so that we're all benefiting from the renewables and not just fossil fuels. So yeah, while you were talking about the industrial, you were talking about that that change in the industrial amount of fuel use. I thought about it, and I think that's a rate plan at Dominion. It's like an industrial rate, and any company can just change their rate at any time. So it may be that the industries are still there. They might have just changed their rate. And the only reason I know that is because MUSC changes our rates sometimes. It just depends on what rate is more beneficial. And the larger your company is, the more Dominion is tracking that, and they actually help companies pick the correct rate. So that could have been going on. So
potentially.
Yeah. So it's companies saving money.
Well, it wasn't just the money. I mean, it was that the kilowatts actually decreased.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. But it would have been in a different category. AW, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
All right. So I do not see any other questions. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
I guess I'll just plug one more time if looking for help for the volunteer sector specific work groups. If you're interested, really, yeah, I think it'll be really interesting, and just looking for help coming up with different emissions reductions activities. So if you're interested, and if you're not interested in that, but you have other ideas, I'm just gonna put my email in the chat. If you want to contact me for any other reason, please feel free. And thank you again, Christine, for hosting this.
Thank you, Arielle, for coming, and thank you to everyone for coming today. Again, this has been recorded, and we will put that on our MUSC Sustainability YouTube channel. So we invite you to send that to anyone that you know is interested. And yeah, we will hopefully be back again next month with a new topic, and we'll be sending that out. So stay tuned.